At War 642 on May 27, 1940, Captain Jack Churchill stood silently in the dark, damp hayloft of a granary in the village of Lepinette, France. Below him, the German 14th Infantry Regiment was advancing through the morning mist, unaware that they were being watched by a man who looked like he had stepped out of a century-old history book. 33 years old, a former newspaper editor and professional bagpipe player, Jack was not holding a rifle. In his calloused hands was a 100-pound Spanish yew longbow, its string pulled taut, a black shafted hunting arrow notched and ready. His men, crouched in the shadows with their modern Lee Enfield rifles, watched their commander in stunned silence. For months they had whispered behind his back. They had laughed at the broadsword strapped to his waist and the bow slung over his shoulder. In an era of tanks, Stuka dive bombers, and MG-34 machine guns, Jack Churchill was carrying weapons from the Battle of Agincourt. His commanding officers called it eccentric. The younger soldiers called it madness. But Jack's answer was always the same. Any officer who goes into action without his sword is improperly dressed. To him, the bow was silent, deadly, and terrifying. No German soldier expected to see an arrow arching through the air in 1940. That mindset defined everything about Jack Churchill. The arithmetic of the village defense was grim, a small company of British soldiers against an oncoming wave of German infantry. Jack had told his men, "I will signal the start of the attack by dropping that German sergeant." At exactly 0644, he released the string. The arrow hissed through the air, traveling with enough force to kill. It struck the German sergeant squarely in the chest, pinning him to the wooden frame of a door. Before the Germans could even comprehend what had happened, Jack leaped from the hayloft, drawing his heavy claymore broadsword and screaming at the top of his lungs. The sight was so bizarre, so primordially terrifying, that the German patrol froze. They weren't facing a modern soldier. They were facing a medieval nightmare. Jack swung the sword in wide, brutal arcs, leading his men into a frantic bayonet charge. That single arrow was the only confirmed longbow kill of the entire Second World War. But for Jack, it was just the beginning. If you want to see how Jack's madness turned the tide of impossible missions across Europe, please hit that like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories from World War II. Subscribe if you haven't already. Back to Jack. Jack's tactical awareness was legendary. He didn't just fight with old weapons. He used psychological warfare. By 1941, he had joined the Commandos, the elite of the elite. During the Vaxo raid in Norway, as the landing craft doors hit the water, Jack didn't charge out with a submachine gun. He stood at the front of the boat, the cold North Sea wind biting at his face, and played March of the Cameron Men on his bagpipes. The sound of the pipes echoing off the Norwegian fjords chilled the German defenders to the bone. As the last note faded, he threw a grenade, drew his sword, and disappeared into the smoke. He was a man who lived by the blade. In July 1943, during the landing at Salerno, Jack led his commandos into the dark towards the town of Piegaletti. He ordered his men to shout "Commando" as loudly as they could while they moved through the woods. The German defenders, hearing the screams and the eerie skirl of bagpipes in the distance, thought they were being attacked by a massive force. In reality, it was just Jack and a handful of men. Using only his broadsword, Jack personally captured 42 German soldiers and a mortar crew that night. He simply walked up to them, sword drawn, and demanded their surrender. They were so disoriented by the sight of him that they laid down their MG-42s without a fight. But the war was brutal, and even a man with a sword couldn't stay invincible forever. In 1944, on the island of Brač in Yugoslavia, Jack was leading a group of partisans and commandos to take a strategic hilltop called Point 622. They were pinned down by heavy machine gun fire. Most of his men were killed or wounded. Jack, left alone on the hilltop as the Germans closed in, did the only thing he thought was appropriate. He took out his bagpipes and began playing "Will You No Come Back Again?" as the Germans tossed grenades into his position. A fragment knocked him unconscious. When the Germans found him, they were baffled. They had expected a high-ranking officer with secret maps. Instead, they found a man with bagpipes and a medieval sword. Because of his name, the Germans thought he was related to Winston Churchill. He was sent to the Sachsenhausen concentration camp under heavy guard. But Jack Churchill was not a man who could be held by wire and stone. In September 1944, he and a Royal Air Force officer crawled under the camp's wire fence through an abandoned drain. They began walking toward the Baltic coast over 200 miles away. They walked at night, sleeping in ditches during the day, eating raw vegetables stolen from fields. They were captured just miles from the sea and sent to a high-security camp in the Tyrol Mountains. In April 1945, when the camp's lighting system failed, Jack didn't hesitate. He simply walked out into the darkness. He spent the next 8 days trekking across the Alps, surviving on nothing but stolen onions and water from mountain streams. He walked 150 miles until he saw an American armored column. He walked into the middle of the road, tattered, starving, but still carrying himself like a colonel, and waved them down. The Distinguished Service Order and Military Cross citations would follow, but Jack wasn't finished. When he heard the war in Europe had ended, he was genuinely angry. He felt the war had ended too soon. He was transferred to the Pacific to fight the Japanese. But by the time he arrived in India, the atomic bombs had been dropped. Jack's reaction was famous. "If it wasn't for those damn Yanks, we could have kept the war going for another 10 years. Most soldiers returned home to quiet lives, but Jack Churchill stayed in. He joined the Seaforth Highlanders and moved to Palestine in 1948. Even there, his legend grew. During a rescue mission of a medical convoy, Jack walked into the middle of a massive firefight between Arab and Jewish forces, wearing his full-dress uniform and carrying a walking stick. He stood there, completely exposed to the bullets, and coordinated the evacuation of hundreds of civilians. He was the only person on the battlefield that neither side dared to shoot. Later in life, Jack moved to Australia, where he became the first person to ride a tidal bore on a surfboard he designed himself. He spent his retirement years in England, throwing his briefcase out of the train window every day on his way home from work. When his neighbors asked why, he explained that he was throwing it into his own backyard so he wouldn't have to carry it from the station. Jack Churchill died on March 8, 1996, at the age of 89. He was the last of the true warriors, a man who believed that technology could never replace the courage of a man with a blade. He lived through the most violent century in human history by bringing a 14th century heart to a 20th century battlefield. He was buried with full honors, but his true monument is the David C. Schilling-like legacy he left in the commando community, a man who was mocked for his toys and his madness, until those very things saved his life and the lives of his men time and time again. He attacked impossible odds with a bagpipe and a sword, and he won. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about men who carried swords into machine gun fire and lived to tell the tale. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Our community stretches across the entire world. You're not just a viewer. You're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served, or if you've ever heard of Mad Jack before today. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Jack Churchill doesn't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.